What's the flag in your lapel?
That is the flag of Kurdistan. The Kurdish people are the largest people in the world, the largest ethnic group, if you like, the largest nation that don't have a state. The Qatari and Kuwaiti royal families have a seat and a vote at the United Nations. The Kurdish people, who are perhaps as many as 35 to 40 million, don't have any diplomatic representation at all. But they are a big part of Free Iraq. And so I wear the flag as a sign of solidarity with the revolution in Iraq that removed Saddam Hussein, defeated Al-Qaeda, and is trying to build.
Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher Hitchens, what's it feel like to be 60?
Very much the same as it did to be 59. These are arbitrary dates in a way. Edmund Wilson wrote an article called The Author at 60. He wouldn't even say myself at 60 or Edmund Wilson at 60. It had to be The Author at 60, which I'm going to read later on this week.
You're just days into the 60th year. What's life like?
I suppose I would add one thing, I mean, since you do ask. In a funny way, I never expected to live this long.
Why?
And the even more strange thing is, well, I can remember when 30 seemed very old to me. And I was probably in the early 20s then. That thought kept on decade by decade. I didn't used to get the blues, as some people do, as decades turned. With 60, the risk of it is you say, I remember the first time I met Brian Lamb and came on C-SPAN. That was 28 years ago. You think, I may not have another 28 to come. That hits you a bit more than it did when you were 40, let's say.
What is life like for you?
At present?
Yeah.
Well, I'm writing a memoir, so I'm having to go through all this anyway. And again, great stretches of time are involved, and the realization that first I've seen more days than I'm going to see, seen more sunsets and dawns than I'm going to see. I can live with that. I always knew that was true. No point being in denial there. But if I didn't have children to date things by, I think it would seem very arbitrary. But what makes it real is realizing that I have a son who once was on this show with me, remember?
He's 10 years old.
Who will be a quarter of a century old next month.
He'll be 25 years old. What's he doing?
He's working for a think tank in London called the Centre for Social Cohesion. Bit of a mouthful name, but it essentially says that religious groups shouldn't make special claims, that there should be a national and common citizenship without being denominated by faith.
You have 2 other children.
I do have 2 daughters. In fact, at present, I can say I'm the father of 2 teenage girls. But that'll change in September when Sophia will become 20. And perhaps even more dramatically, Antonia will become 16.
What has been your, this is not heavy-duty policy, I know, but what has been your kind of mission with those 3 kids? What kind of a father have you been?
Pretty indifferent, I suspect. I mean, I always feel that I get better with children the older they get. I think this is probably true of a lot of men. Though why would I seek shelter in the majority? I don't normally try and do that. But a striking thing, let's say, about women is, about both my wives, is that they know what to do when babies occur. They sort of know what to do. No, very few men do. They think, somehow it seems to be female when they're little, and even when they're growing. I think this is probably true to an abnormal extent with me, as it was with my own father. You hardly barely notice him until you're a bit older. And so what I hope to do to redeem how little I was involved in the infancy bit is to be a pal and a prop and a stay and a force as they become older. It's, I think, worked so far.
Go back to the memoir for a moment.
Yeah.
Where are you in that? When's it due, and how much time have you spent on it, and what's your approach to it?
I spend all my time thinking about it and quite all my time writing about it. After all, it's about me, so I can always spare the time. And with luck, it'll be turned into my publisher in the fall, and that'll mean it'll be published sometime in the spring or early summer of next year.
So but give us the approach you're making. I mean, hey, tell us one thing that's going to be in there that we don't know.
Oh, I couldn't tell you just one. I mean, the theme is that of a divided self. I haven't got a title for it yet, but if it was a pop song title, it would be called Both Sides Now. I've often felt myself exactly split down the middle and able to see, which is an advantage, both sides of every question. Able also to take oneself and take it strongly, but sometimes feel the temptation to see it from the other as well. And this has been the case with other aspects of my life. Finding out later in life that my mother was Jewish, for example. I had a second identity. Spending quite a lot of time with a wife who was Greek and trying to become, in part, a member of another society, language and culture, looking for another second identity there. Taking pleasure in, if you like, having it both ways, which maybe would be a good title for the book.
Your first wife, you were married to her for how long?
Don't let me hesitate unduly, because I was with her for longer than we were married, if you know what I mean. I remember we got married the year I moved to the United States, which was B81, but we'd been a team for longer than that, for a couple of years on it. And we were separated in '89 and probably divorced a year after.
And where she lived today?
In London.
Your second wife, Carol Blue.
Was Blue.
You met her where?
In Los Angeles, her native city.
And what were the circumstances?
I was on a book tour. When people say to me, just while I think about this, the thought we were just having, people say, isn't it a bit early to be doing your memoirs? Because after I'm only 60, and as you haven't said yet, I don't look it, but I know you were going to say that. You suddenly think, yes, maybe it is early, but you can't wait till it's too late. So if you're ever going to do it, you're going to have to do it now.
I want to, speaking of how you look, I want to go back to '83, our first interview on book notes together in '83.
You have this?
Yeah, I want you to see what you look like. Let's run this.
Let's bring a little light to this, instead of all heat, let's bring a little light to this conversation
Light
and
comes
talk
from
about
heat.
trends.
Light only comes from heat.
Okay, thank you so
evolutionary.
much.
Sorry.
Christopher, hold on. Guys, stop. God bless us all. Just stop and let's have a meaningful conversation
Well, don't invite
instead
me
of
on and tell
people
me to
talking
keep
on top of each
Don't invite me
other.
on and tell me to keep quiet.
Well,
Don't do
Christopher,
that.
why don't you let
I came
other
here to
people
talk,
talk
not to
for a
listen to
second,
you.
okay?
You invited me to
Okay,
give
so
my
anyway,
opinions, not
Matt.
to listen to yours.
Okay, well, you know what, Christopher? I'll never make that mistake again.
Fair
Matt, here's the question,
Merry
okay?
Christmas.
Merry Christmas and good night.
Your reaction to seeing yourself.
I think I left that one. I think I actually walked out of that one. I thought, look, either have me on, ask my view, or don't. But don't tell me what to say, don't tell me what you think all the time. I actually corrected Mr. Scarborough. I think I improved him slightly as a host and as a talk show person. He made an obvious mistake. And everyone gives themselves permission to behave absurdly when religion is mentioned. He's just another one of those who do. By the way, when are we going to mention my new paperback version of my anti-God book? When are you going to put the title and everything on the screen? When are we going to say find bookstores everywhere?
We'll do it shortly. We're going to go back to '98, though.
Okay.
I want you to see
I hadn't thought of it till now, but
one of a relative of yours. Fans, Washington Journal, the Hitchens brothers are back, one on the right coast, one on the left coast. We'll start here on the right coast with Peter Hitchens. What do you make of all of this?
Well, apart from all the laughing I've been doing, I'm beginning to feel that I've come out here perhaps a little too soon. It doesn't seem to be developing as fast as everyone
Filled me
in
with a
London.
new respect for the American right. I'd up till now thought of them as rather an unpolished crew, the sort of people who tour the country calling for sexual abstinence among teenagers, for example. But now it seems that they can infiltrate a well-heeled liberal babe from Beverly Hills into the White House, get her in to see the president just as he's come from church with his daughter, get her in to see Vernon Jordan just the day before she signs an affidavit, and get him to get her in to see Revlon just the day after she's signed on the dotted line. This is genius.
Lewinsky, that's your brother Peter.
yes. That was, well, apart from the tie, which it's better not to wear one than wear one like that. I think that's me at my best, actually. I mean, saying, okay, if you believe the liberal theory that Clinton was set up and that Monica Lewinsky was a stalker, that's the sort of stuff you're going to have to believe.
What's your relationship with your brother these days?
Not bad. He's, like all Hitchens is, a man of principle. Able to turn a phrase in print and on the air. The main difference that we have is that he's I wouldn't say born again, but he's a very decided fundamentalist Christian. Not of a fanatical sort, but of a very, very decided, very determined Episcopalian conservative sort. And with people like that, I can never be completely at ease. I just can't.
Now, he lives where?
He lives in Oxford, in England. But he commutes regularly. He lives between Oxford and London, where his media base is.
And what was his reaction when you found out that your mother was Jewish?
Well, we found out partly because our grandmother, my mother's mother, had outlived both my parents. The lady went to a great age. And because Peter had married a Jewish wife. And when he took her to meet my grandmother said, "Oh, she's Jewish, isn't she?" And Peter sort of bridled a bit, and my grandmother, having no reason to keep the family secret any longer, said, "Well, I've got something to tell you." So it was Peter who brought me the news. I think I don't know why I say this, but I have a feeling I was just very slightly more pleased and interested than he was.
Why?
Well, among other things, he and his Jewish wife had both converted to Christianity. So it was a bit more turning over the luggage in their hold than it was in mine.
So your grandmother was Jewish?
My wife is Jewish also. So.
But your grandmother's Jewish?
Yes.
And then that would make your mother Jewish, and then
yes, indeed. If you believe in Mosaic law, the law of return, and the Nuremberg laws, and I have problems with all these three laws, but yes, it's a matrilineal succession, and I'd certainly never, if I was asked if I was Jewish, whether the tone of voice was friendly or hostile, I would never say no. Would never be able to deny it or want to.
We'll get closer to your book on this clip with Anderson Cooper when you appeared on there and talked about the death of Jerry Falwell. I don't know if you remember this or not.
I remember the event quite well, yeah.
Christopher, I'm not sure if you believe in heaven, but if you do you think Jerry Falwell is in it?
No, and I think it's a pity there isn't a hell for him to go to.
What is it about him that brings up such vitriol?
The empty life of this ugly little charlatan proves only one thing, that you can get away with the most extraordinary offenses to morality and to truth in this country if you'll just get yourself called reverend. Who would, even at your network, have invited on such a little toad to tell us that the attacks of September the 11th were the result of our sinfulness and were God's punishment if they hadn't got some kind of clerical qualification? People like that should be out in the street shouting and hollering with a cardboard sign and selling pencils from a cup. I don't know why I was so lenient on the little rat bag. He came on the television while the downtown Manhattan was still smoldering. There were cell phones screeching under the rubble, and people still alive. And he said, this is because we allowed divorce and homosexuality. The hell with him.
You know,
what I went on to say is that if he could have been given an enema, he could have been buried in a matchbox. And that's what I didn't get time to say on Mr. Cooper, but I got time to say later on. That's what I meant to say.
How much of what you say is calculated?
None. It's meant. In the sense of being, it's not done for effect, if that's what you mean.
Well, the audience
I don't say anything. No, it's a very good question. I ask myself a lot of the time because I'm often on the telly and on the radio, and I often have a book to sell, and I don't want to suspect myself of just doing things for effect. If I ever go further than I mean to, and I say something that is cheap or overstated, I always will try and come back and correct myself and say, okay, maybe that was. I don't do things just for you're pursing your lips, Mr. Knight.
No, I actually wanted to.
I like to find a gifted phrase if I can and try and make it stick, make it memorable.
I really wanted to ask you, though, when there was an occasion where you and someone else really were, the word mad doesn't describe it, but you were furious with one another, or you really had a confrontation that was personal and serious and deep.
on the air.
With anybody, anyway, you know, just in life. I mean, people that watch television never know how much of it's a gimmick.
Exactly, and that's where one wants to suspect one's own motives. This will seem odd, but I'll answer it like this. I'm reviewing a book at present of essays by Henry Fairley. Perhaps you remember him. Quite good English-born essayist, often in the New Republic, especially in the 80s, 90s. He was a great writer and a great polemicist, but I used to think that sometimes he would feign his anger. He would think, you know, I need to get a piece, I need to get paid, I need to get an article done. He would invent a subject to be annoyed about, and I just think that will always show. So I suppose I have to submit myself, in answering your question, not to my own verdict that you're inviting, but to the safekeeping of the good taste of the audience. I mean, if the people who read me and watch me, if they think I'm doing this because I just want to make a splash, well, they're entitled to think that, and I would obviously suffer a decline in respect. I don't think, in fact, I give off the impression that I do this for effect.
But back to the other part of the question, though, what's the biggest, most serious feud you've had with any individual? And that was real. I mean, that they weren't phony and you weren't phony, and it was...
I guess it would be with Henry Kissinger and his defenders, what I can call to mind of the recent past. I wrote a book saying that I thought he should be arrested and put on trial, and that if he was, he'd be convicted for crimes against humanity and for war crimes. And he made a very crude reply to me, on television, in point of fact, saying that I was everything from a Holocaust denier to a person who trashed Jackie Kennedy. And in fact, on both those charges, as you know, I can't be indicted, but I eventually got his lawyers to issue an apology about this, and I took it very seriously indeed, and I hate him, and I hate the toadies in the press and in the academy and in publishing who've helped to smooth his path.
You hate him?
Hate them. Hate him. Yeah.
And what's the...
I feel it's an insult that such a person is around, is deferred to, is consulted, is treated with politeness in the academy and by our profession and in the publishing industry. I've said all that.
Have you ever met him?
Yes, I met him 2 or 3 times. He's never been induced to speak to me, but he's sometimes had to be in the same room, with evident ill grace. I think, no, that's probably been for me the most long-lasting and deep-going and most hate-based relationship I've had with anybody.
You asked about this book. We did not actually ask you on the program to talk about this book.
I know you didn't, but I'm not going to let you get away with it.
That's fine. No, it's how many copies of hardback did you sell?
A lot, about 350,000 in hardback.
And the title is God is Not Great is now in paperback. And what kind of sales do you expect of this?
Oh, I would hope even larger, because the subject has become even more acute than when I didn't broach it. I mean, it broached itself. The battle between civilization and civil society and theocracy is becoming every day much more intense and much more urgent. And the number of people who will come now to a public debate on this, I go to do this kind of debate about twice a week now, is growing all the time. I mean, the audience for the argument is enormous.
Why?
Well, I think for 2 reasons. One is religion is the most interesting subject of all. I mean, if you have a friend or an acquaintance, you know an awful lot about them, depending on whether they attribute their presence in the studio to the laws of biology, the laws of nature, the laws of evolution by natural selection, or whether they think that they're here because of a divine plan. It's a big difference, philosophically, morally. And so going into this means you raise all the most interesting, all the most fundamental, basic questions. That's the first thing. So it's never a boring discussion. And second, or it shouldn't be, and the second is that at the moment, if you open the newspaper and see how the parties of God are behaving around the world, everywhere from Russia to Iran to even certain parts of the United States where they think they ought to influence the education system, that people are, I think, becoming fed up with being pushed around by ordinary mammals who think that they are better than us because they have God on their side. Enough with this. It's very insulting, it's very threatening, it's very stupid, and it's becoming, and now we have the chance that apocalyptic weaponry will fall into the hands of messianic states or organizations, Armageddon-type forces. Clear and present danger.
Did you ever believe in God?
No.
Did your parents?
Yes. They must have done at some point. Well, I think my father probably must have done. I don't know this, because of course I always have this doubt about people who even affirm that they believe in God. Do they believe in it all the time? Do they believe in it every day? Do they never have crises of faith? Why do they have to keep on going to church to prove that they believe? Why isn't it simple to them?
Would you say that the...
But I mean, my father came from a very strong Baptist family. He must, when he was young, I think, have been a believer.
What about your children?
I wouldn't ask them, nor I hope would they want to ask me. I mean, they shouldn't. Obviously, my children do now know. They have to know what I think, because it's well known. But I would prefer that they did not. I think children should be able to make up their own minds about this. Well, I mean, my youngest daughter, for example, goes to Sidwell Friends School, where they're not made to be Quaker, and where they are taught about other faiths, so they can make up their own minds. That's all I want for them. I would never dream of imposing it on them, and they really ought not to know what my beliefs are, at least until they're of the age of reason. It's repulsive to me to hear people saying, which we see in the newspaper, a Muslim child was killed, or a Catholic child was killed in Northern Ireland, or a Protestant child. How do we know this about them? What choice did they have about it? What I mean is, a child victim of a filthy religious war was killed.
That was in our first book notes, right here.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that.
When I was still a smoker. Yeah, that's in Timberlake's Bar. I remember it very well.
It is near DuPont Circle, and if you'll notice, this is in the middle of the day. You've got your computer there, you've got a martini on the bar, and you've got a cigarette in your mouth.
And a gut, like a, I don't know, sumo wrestler as well.
Would you do that today?
No, I had to give up smoking. Well, I didn't have to, but I made myself give up about 2 years ago.
What about the drinking?
And with the booze, I find it's a better servant than a master.
Explain.
Well, actually, though I say that in that tense, I've always thought that it's very important that it be a master-servant relationship. In other words, that you should get more out of it than it gets out of you. I've found alcohol interesting. It makes other people less boring. It's a great recommendation that it has. Some people can't write or talk or do anything much when they've had a few drinks. Without boasting, I can say that I can. Sometimes that I want to. It can be an inspiration to me. And I know that it can. I know this from friends and from relatives and from one or two episodes in my own life. It can be very bad to have too much. But I have it I still think as a friend and an ally, and not as a boss or a foe.
How do you, this is almost a question for a classroom, but how do you make your money? In other words, if somebody's watching saying, boy, I'd love to live the life of Christopher Hitchens.
There must be.
No, but when they, I'd love to have that life of words,
yes,
and writing and speaking and all that. How do you, and can you make a decent living doing what you do?
You can if it's all you want to do. In other words, once you've decided that all you want to be as a writer, and once you've learned that all you need really as a writer is to be able to talk, to speak, to have a voice. Many of my students say, is that all you need? You just have to be able to talk? And I say, yes, but how many of you can? How many of your friends do you enjoy listening to? Really? Do you enjoy listening to yourself? Do you try and talk in sentences? Then they realize it's not so easy. But once you've discovered the joy of that, or in my case, just the fact that I knew it was all I could do, I never wanted to do. It doesn't matter. I didn't mind when I first came on your show, I made a few $100 out of it. But I knew I was doing what I wanted.
You didn't make a few $100 coming on our show. You made $100 out of writing.
No, nothing out of yours. No, you actually to this day.
We pay you with money.
You used to not even pay for my cab. But, No, but so I knew that I was making a few $100 in that kind of writing, but it was what I wanted to do. So there was nothing to. Now I do better, and if you want to know exactly how I do it, it's this. Vanity Fair, the best magazine in the country, in the world, in fact, the English-speaking one, pays me a monthly retainer to write in a column, about 10 out of 12 months. And so I know I've got that much. It's not a fortune at all, but it's pretty generous. I can count on it. The contract is renewed every couple of years. And they're fairly decent about letting me write for other people, book reviews, and so forth. And then it's got to the stage now where people will actually pay me to come and talk to them, which is better than I ever expected. I mean, I'm going to be talking anyway, so to be paid to do it is pretty amazing.
How many speeches a year would you get?
Well, since the religion debate got really going, it became a big national, big cultural question, I would say it's probably twice a week. And I do pro bono speeches, of course, for good causes. The liberation of Iraq, for example, I spent a lot of time arguing in public in favor of the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. I didn't get paid for that.
This book, if there were 300-some-thousand copies of this, and you pick up $2-3 a copy, that's pretty good money. I mean, is that? And
then some of my books have done okay, but I used to be box office poison for publishers. I mean, I wrote some books that I was quite proud of, but George Orwell was one I remember, and it didn't really sell at all except among Orwell fans.
This one right
and
here?
then yes, thank you.
I actually found this on the remainder table, I'm sorry to tell you.
As long as it doesn't have an inscription from me inside saying...
It does not.
Saying to Angela with undying love or something. I mean, I hate it when that happens.
What about your book? I'm sure that it causes controversy where you go on Mother Teresa. Did that sell?
Oh, that sells a lot, especially at Christmas time.
At Christmas time?
Yes, ex or lapsed Catholics give it to their families for Christmas on a regular basis. And every year, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And then I teach. I teach at Hoover, and I'm a visiting professor at the New School in New York. I love doing that. I really do. I learn a lot from teaching. That's the whole point. I mean, you go through a book with your class. You think you've read it 50 times. The 51st time, you'll always still notice something you wouldn't have noticed before. You never do read the same book twice. It helps you to write, it helps you to think.
Does your wife work?
I wish it paid more. Teaching was better paid than it was, because, or that I didn't have 3 children, because I'd love to spend more time teaching and less time just feeding the beast.
Does your wife work?
She's a screenwriter, which, as you know, means that you're never quite sure whether you've sold a script or not. I mean, so the things are always in play. She's an Angelina.
I have a question. I know you're not expecting this.
I wasn't expecting any of them.
I know, but
we didn't. None of this was contrived.
It sure isn't. But have you ever gotten on your Wikipedia site?
No. You mean
the Christopher Hitchens Wikipedia site? Yeah.
No.
You have never looked at it?
No. I don't surf much anyway.
I just want to. I got on, and it's 20 pages long.
Aha.
And you know how this works?
No, this is an area I'm very poor on. I mean, there are several websites I know about me. I dare say there's a Wikipedia one. There's a website, or there was, called Hitchens Watch or something, that's unfriendly to me. There's another one that is more friendly. I don't have time for this, to be honest.
Well, the reason I ask you this is because when you Google the name Christopher Hitchens, or you Google anybody's name, more than likely the first couple of places to go is Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is written by almost anonymously by, maybe in your case, hundreds of people.
Right.
I found your first Wikipedia site, and you were first up, at least according to what I could find on the records, in 2003. Wikipedia is 7 years old. I just wanted you to hear what people said 6 years ago.
Yeah.
May 18th, 2003, first item, Christopher Hitchens. You see, we as readers don't know who wrote this, but it's a.
Just before we go on, I would say that when I look at Wikipedia myself on a topic I know something about, I generally find it, so I may be giving a hostage to fortune here, I generally find it amazingly reliable.
Well, it's not a question of reliability, it's a question that they can characterize you here, and I want to read.
Well, they're free to do that.
Back in 2003, what they said. what they, whoever they are. Christopher Hitchens is a British-born American journalist, author, and self-proclaimed political...
That's not true.
Well...
I'm not self-proclaimed gadfly.
Okay, but here we are, you know...
I've never said the word gadfly.
This is this
about
week
myself.
in Wikipedia. And
in fact, I've disowned the word gadfly. So they're wrong right there.
Okay, but well, that's changed since
Well, how does one get it corrected?
Well, let me read to you what it's today. That's
Okay.
gone. You
Okay,
have to
fine.
go back and say. Today it says Christopher Eric Hitchens.
Yes.
Born April 13th, 1949, is an author, journalist, and literary critic. How we doing?
Well,
Current-
boring but uncontroversial.
I know. Currently living in Washington, D.C., he has been a columnist at Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, World Affairs, The Nation, Slate, Free Inquiry, and a variety of other media outlets. And it goes on, and this is, it talks about your book, God is Not Great and all that. But then it gets down, it says, in 2009, Hitchens was listed by Forbes magazine as one of the, quote, 25 most influential liberals in U.S. media. The same article noted, though, that he would, quote, likely be aghast to find himself on this list, unquote, and that he, quote, styles himself as a radical, unquote, not a liberal. How we doing?
It's all right. But it's getting to the point where you're getting publicity for getting publicity, which is, to me, slightly boring.
Well,
there's too much of this stuff now. I mean, it's all sort of reputation about your reputation.
Often Wikipedia has nothing to do with being exciting or boring because they have so many people get their hands in the pie on this thing.
Yeah, but what they're saying is
you.
they might as well say there's a perception that rather than the following is the case.
Well, because
I don't know. I can't see why there's so much of this stuff. But
yeah, well,
anyway, I know there is.
It goes on forever and ever, and I just, I was interested in whether.
Well, so will I for him.
But
if allowed to do so.
They have the different categories: literary review, Hitchens and the Nation staff. And then they quote one of your old friends, Alexander Coburn. What's your relationship with him now?
I haven't seen Alexander since his beautiful niece's wedding, where he officiated a little while ago. We used to see a lot of each other, but we live on remotely opposite coasts now. He's in Northern California, I'm in Washington.
On about the third page of Wikipedia, or fourth page, it says, among his most severe critics is one-time colleague and friend Alexander Coburn, a weekly contributor to The Nation. On August the 20th, 2005, Coburn wrote, what a truly disgusting sack of you-know-what. Hitchens, and there's another four-letter word, the guy who called Sid Blumenthal one of his best friends and then tried to have him thrown into prison for perjury. A guy who waited until his friend Edward Said was on his deathbed before attacking him in the Atlantic Monthly. A guy who knows perfectly well the role Israel plays in U.S. policy, but who does not scruple to flail Cindy Sheehan as a LaRouche and an anti-Semite because maybe she dared mention the word Israel.
Well, he's nearly right about that. I mean, the sack of, etc. is better of anyone's opinion, but on the criticisms of Edward Said, I didn't publish them when he was on his deathbed, except in that I kept on publishing. And he and I had a couple of long-standing disagreements, and those didn't change when he was ill, and they didn't indeed change after he died, when I published a sort of estimate of him. I thought a very generous one, which included the criticism. But it's actually rather silly of Alexander to say that, I think, because if you look at his journalism, he would rightly be proud of saying that he's often written counter-obituaries of people who've been overpraised and chosen precisely the moment when there's a lot of sentimental garbage being published to say, come on, this guy wasn't so great. So it's silly of him. He gives a hostage to fortune in some way. Cindy Sheehan, I caught out in a lot on Slate. You can check it out. It was exhaustively done with all kinds of stuff. She had said she thought her son was killed in a pro-Israeli war, a Jewish war. She later tried to pretend she hadn't said this, and so I caught her twice. I think it's beneath Alexander to be defending someone as cheap and demagogic as her. Who remembers now the Cindy Sheehan campaign, honestly? And what if we'd listened to her? If we listened to her and pulled out our troops as a result of her hysteria, Iraq would now be run by Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda could have claimed to have driven us out in ignominy and shame. Instead of which Al-Qaeda's been defeated and humiliated. and Iraq is at least on course to become many shoals ahead of it a decent society. No one can possibly wish that Sunni Shia had been listened to.
By the way, I'll be glad to let you see this. This is 20 pages long, one of the longest that I've seen in Wikipedia. So they're defining you, and when you go out to speak, you'd be surprised how often you might be introduced with the information that's contained in it.
Yes, well, I'll bear it in mind. But now that there's YouTube and now there's all this stuff, it's hopeless to even want to, and in fact, fortunately I don't want to have any control over one's own image.
Let me ask you in our time remaining.
Yeah.
What you're a historian, you talk about the world. Where do you fit 9/11 in events that have happened in world history? I mean, how is this going to fit 25 years from now?
I think it'll fit with a couple of other events. One that, to me, gets more and more significant, and this where you also very kindly have me on. 14th of February 1989, the Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwā against Salman Rushdie. There's a new book by a man called Kenan Malik, an author in Britain, about the fatwā against Rushdie, and it's called From Fatwa to Jihad. And I think that the hinge moment in history, the time when things were turning in a major cultural way, historical way, is somewhere between 89 and 2001, when a wing of Islam, at any rate, a certain arc of the Muslim world, decided that it was at war. And then it took a little time for us to discover that we were at war too. But history does turn a bit more slowly than that. There aren't, when you have a moment like Sarajevo in 1914, say, or some apparent flash, or the Bastille in 1789, or Lexington. What these flashes illuminate is a scene that's already been prepared, already been set. That's the way I think to be a historian.
One of the questions that I know I used to love to get the audience's reaction to is, on our Cullen show, is America the greatest country in the world?
Huh. Or as
how would you answer?
Well, Spiro Agnew was supposed to have said, the greatest nation in the country. Something. Gore Vidal has a wonderful take on this. It's something to be proven rather than stated, it seems to me. Something to be demonstrated rather than affirmed. But yes, I would say, in this sense, as someone who used to take pride in being called a revolutionary, sometimes for good and sometimes for slightly callow reasons, but anyway, I'm not ashamed of it. Where's the Russian Revolution now? Gone. Where's the Chinese Revolution now? It's mutated into something completely opposite, different to itself. The Cuban Revolution is moribund at the best. The French Revolution, well, it did have a great effect on the Enlightenment, but it was, and I wouldn't denigrate it, it's French. The American Revolution, the one that says, build your republic on individual rights, not group rights. Have a Bill of Rights that inscribes these and makes them available and legible to everybody. Separate the church from the state. Separate the executive, the judicial, and the political branch. Do all these things. It doesn't sound like much, but it's really a very revolutionary idea. There's hardly a country in the world that wouldn't benefit from adopting those principles. I think that gives the United States a really good claim to be a revolutionary country, as well as, of course, paradoxically, it's a very conservative one. Certainly makes me very glad, very proud to have become a citizen of it.
What's the flag in your lapel?
That is the flag of Kurdistan. The Kurdish people are the largest people in the world, the largest ethnic group, if you like, largest nation that don't have a state. The Qatari and Kuwaiti royal families have a seat and a vote at the United Nations. The Kurdish people, who are perhaps as many as 35 to 40 million, don't have any diplomatic representation at all. But they are a big part of free Iraq. And so I wear the flag as a sign of solidarity with the revolution in Iraq that removed Saddam Hussein, defeated Al-Qaeda, and is trying to build a republic.
We've got just about a minute left. You're always traveling. Where's your next trip?
I don't know. Sorry for such a boring answer. My last trip was to Athens. Maybe that's a better answer. I've just come back. I'm trying to write something about the new Acropolis Museum, the greatest new museum for a long time in Europe. Be opened on 21st of June. It'll contain all the sculpture and treasury of the Parthenon and the other temples of the Acropolis, and it has room for all the stolen sculpture taken by British imperialists like Lord Elgin to be given back, so we can see how all that sculpture is symmetrical and supposed to be seen in the same place at the same time. And I've done a piece of Vanity Fair about how wonderful it'll be when we can see all that.
I suppose I better mention this book one more time.
If you would.
God is Not Great, How Religions Poison Everything by Christopher Hitchens. We are out of time.
Fine bookstores everywhere.
Yes. And thank you for joining us.
No, it was a pleasure, as always.